My name is Sartini. I'm an English teacher, and welcome to my online classroom, a space where we read and analyze works of English literature to better understand how to live. Today we're doing a summary and analysis of chapter number 1 in F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. This book in particular, before we begin, I want to say I have a lot of personal investment in. And I think the best way to go about, for me, breaking this book down is to focus the analysis particularly on the concepts relating to dating, how to get intimate with somebody, what sort of relationships might be bad relationships, what relationships to avoid, and how you might be able, through reading this book, to get a good picture of all of the total things that you should not be doing to maintain a healthy and proper relationship. I think this is a wonderful narrative simply about people who are unable or who desperately wish to avoid human connection. And if you've seen my other lectures, you know that the main purpose why I do these talks is to sort of figure out how we can use literature as a method to give our lives meaning through better connecting with people. So this is really a book about disunity between people and what a life lived without a sort of closeness with others, what that might look like at the end, and how that lack of intimacy sort of changes and shapes people. And a looming question, I suppose, that F. Scott Fitzgerald wants to pose to the character of Nick, focusing on the view of Gatsby, the main lead, is whether or not hope is justified, and when you're living a life perhaps of loss, how that changes your identity, and how that change affects a man's perception of the world, and whether or not it is justified that he continues hope despite his loss. So those are some of the key questions in my mind relating to the book. Let's get started with the chapter itself. Now, chapter number 1, I'm mainly going to be doing an overview of the characters and how they've interacted amongst each other. I'm not going to do like a big swathing talk about F. Scott Fitzgerald in the 20s, simply focusing on the textual content, and the book itself begins with the following line. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, my father told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. Now, this line is basically starting off on the note of you as the viewer, you as the reader, are looking at the lives of the privileged elite. You're looking at people that have the 1% of the 1% of the wealth, these sort of gods among us, if you will, these privileged elite few. And there's going to be undertones of this sort of level of wealth and riches, unlike a lot of books. I mean, we're really just focusing on the height of the Roaring 20s, the height of party, the height of luxury, and this particular family, I suppose descendants of the Carraways and the Buchanans, and later on Gatsby himself, these people that have this tremendous wealth. And we're going to be looking at how that wealth shapes these people. And we know immediately that Nick, who is the narrator in this book, is going to be speaking about mainly the wealth that his family has, and noting how wealth is carried on in this world. And perhaps not everybody in the world is like him and comes from such a privileged background. Not everybody, particularly me, particularly you, the readers, are not as affluent as some of the characters in this book. And that's something that Nick himself needs to keep in mind, apparently, or it's a teaching that he's been provided. And also, he has a sort of a comment here about this line, saying something like, there is, quote, a sense of the fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at birth. So he's saying that human ability, wealth, capital is not something that is distributed evenly. There are a privileged few who garner access to this. Now, I'm not saying that as a sort of communist takeover. The 1%, we got to get rid of the 1% and redistribute their wealth. Not what I'm saying. Nick's opinion is sort of everybody gets a different card in life. And his, that he's playing right now, is chance. Chance as in he has by chance come to New York, by chance come to inhabit the space and the home that he does, by chance near to his cousin Daisy, another prominent character, by chance adjacent living to this character of Gatsby. But he was born with a wealthy hand, much like the characters I mentioned previously. And he's saying also, this is sort of the setup touching on the theme of hope in the book. Here's a big passage he sort of quotes to himself here. It's sort of like he's looking back in time. I wanted no more righteous excursions with privileged glimpses into the human heart. Only Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this book, was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have an unaffected scorn. There was something gorgeous about him, some heightened sensitivity to the process of life, as if he was an extraordinary gift for hope, a romantic readiness such as I have never found in any other person, and which it is not likely I shall ever find again. No, Gatsby turned out all right in the end. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams that temporarily closed out my intense interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. So when I'm reading this, it's sort of like Nick wrote this book reflecting on his experiences in New York in that summer, which gives the book itself sort of like a did this really happen? Is it based on a true story? What parts are real? Ooh, feel, which is nice. But basically, Nick is writing a book of reflections about his time, and we're learning that in his time, essentially, everybody is around him is, sort of privileged, elite, hyper-wealthy, and Gatsby himself seems to appear to be as one of these hyper-wealthy, affluent, sort of perhaps stuck-up individuals. But he, however, had this sort of romantic side to him, this sort of sense of uniqueness and individuality, which he found lacking in those with wealth. It was almost as if he cared, and he had a sort of youthful, abundant, exuberant hope within him that was found more attractive than simply the idea that he is one with wealth. And it's not that Gatsby himself has a problem. He actually, quote, turns out all right in the end. But it's something that preyed on Gatsby. It's something that floated in the wake of his dreams. So there's something, we haven't yet met Gatsby in this chapter, but he's someone who represents a dream, a larger-than-life image, a sort of hope, this deep sense in the human psyche of an aspiration towards something higher than just what you're living today, this larger-than-life character. But he's also is a man who's preyed on some sort of sorrow. And I want you to question what that juxtaposition in a character might be, someone at the height of success, but also I wonder what kind of sorrows the heights of success might bring a person, is sort of his character, or so we're introduced in the first couple of lines. And he's saying here that he's driving over to this place called East Egg from where he lives in West Egg to meet some, quote, old friends whom I scarcely knew at all. So again, in that line, he's off to see two friends whom I scarcely knew at all. So this book, again, I'm defining it as is about lack of intimacy between people, and we're seeing already in the first couple of pages that Nick is already admitting he really doesn't know his family or his friends all too well. And who are those people? Well, let's start with Mr. Nick Carraway, our wonderful narrator here. Really liking this character on my third read of this book. A little description on Nick are the following. Quote, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments, a habit that has opened up many curious natures to me, and also made me the victim of not a few veteran bores. I was unjustly accused of being a politician because I was privy to the secret griefs of wild, unknown men. Reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. We have a tradition that we're descended from the Dukes of Buccleuch, I don't know. I participated in that delayed Teutonic migration known as the Great War. I enjoyed the counter-raid so thoroughly that I came back restless. Okay, so basically all those quotes are just reaffirming, hey, Nick is from a very high, prestigious, wealthy family. And his character in itself is more of a passive observer, so he makes for a very good narrator. He's reserving his judgments. He often seems to bore people. It's not known his opinions all of the time. He finds it difficult to connect with people, but always some sort of strange outlier in society. Some very eccentric, wild, unknown men come to him for advice. And he's very reserved in his character. Now, Nick is sort of a boring person, is what one might read that in as. Remember, we're focusing the book on wealthy folks, so there's going to be a lot of parties, going to be a lot of jazz, going to be a lot of singing, dancing, all this sort of crazy stuff in the background. But Nick isn't necessarily like that. He's not interested particularly in the wealth and the money and the dazzle and the razzle. He's actually more interested in just sitting and observing and watching. So he might appear boring from time to time, but that's actually sort of a strategy of his going out in the world. It kind of reminds me of like a journalist where he's simply sitting and observing and commentating on what he sees rather than participating in it, one could say. And he said his total goal is to become a, quote, well-rounded man, or I suppose a normal, average person. one might propose. And Nick's total philosophy can be summed up like this, quote, "Life is much more successfully looked at from a single window, after all. It was a matter of chance that I have rented a house in one of the strangest communities in North America." So, life is much more successfully looked at from a single window. I don't really know what that means, but I find it really important. I think when I think of a window, I think of looking out into the picturesque, world as it is. So, and I feel like he's someone that wants to view life as a very active observer, maybe not necessarily participate in it. Again, he's more of the watcher, the quiet watcher, that is, maybe more of a stoic. But he also has sort of I feel like he's looking for a sort of hope. I feel like that's what he's looking for out of this window. And by chance, he's about to find that hope with his move to the city of New York, or rather, I believe he's in Long Island. I think this is by my house. I don't remember particularly, but I think this is on Long Island anyway. And that's Nick, our narrator. Next, we're going to give an overview into a character of Tom Buchanan. Tom Buchanan, the husband of Daisy. Okay? Tom Buchanan, what does it say about him? First quote, and it's a long one. "Among various physical accomplishments, he had been one of the most powerful ends that had ever played football at New Haven, a national figure in a way, one of those men who reach such an acute limit at excellence at 21 that everything afterwards savors of anticlimax. His family were enormously wealthy. Even in his college, his freedom of money was a matter for reproach, but now he'd left Chicago and come east in a fashion that rather took your breath away. For instance, he'd bought down a string of polo ponies from Lake Forest. It was hard to realize that a man in my own generation was wealthy enough to do that." Okay, so Tom, big man, big muscles, can play football and sports and polo, and's got a bunch of ponies, and he's extremely wealthy. But not only extremely wealthy, it's sort of like he peaked in high school, you could say, or peaked in college. He's sort of just this giant, very well-built man from a well-established family, and it's really built upon in this chapter that this is a large man. We're learning that Tom is unlike the other characters in that his physical nature is something that is notated quite often. Moving on with that, it was said that he, quote, "drifted here and there unrestfully, wherever people played polo and were rich together." So those are really his two personality traits. I, big man, I do sport, and I have money, lots of money. And it's sort of one could wonder really what his purpose was, because, apparently in college he was the big quarterback of the team. Oh my God, he's such a stunning, strapping young man. Look at all those goals that he's getting. I don't know anything about sports. But now it's sort of, well, what do you do when that was your entire life? And what do you do when your life was in the past, but also as you move toward the future, you don't need to work or continue the establishment of identity because you have all you could possibly need due to the previous success of your family. So what kind of a character is Tom, or what is he really striving forward towards now? I felt that Tom would drift on forever, seeking, a little wistfully, for the dramatic turbulence of some irrecoverable football game. So again, Nick is really cementing in this guy's height was in his youth. He had peaked at one time long ago. And he had the sort of air that, quote, "gave him the appearance of always leaning aggressively forward." So he's a very aggressive man, very physical man, very domineering, dominant presence in this book. Quote, "I'd always had the impression that he approved of me and wanted me to like him with some harsh, defiant wistfulness of his own." So that's really interesting. I think this is like the most interesting line about Tom. And again, I don't know why that is. I think it's because it's like Tom is this it's like he was born like the perfect ideal human and everyone naturally likes him. But Nick, because he's an observer, he wants to see more from this person. So he doesn't necessarily give him 100% of his sort of affections. And Tom notices this and is sort of like, well, you're the only person that doesn't like me. Why don't you like me? Why aren't you like everyone else? I need you to like me so I can complete my worldview, sort of thing. And I really like these two other sentences about Tom, which are, "turning me around by one arm," and "there was a boom as Tom Buchanan shut the rear windows and caught the wind died out about the room." So again, big muscles on this guy. Turns people around, picks them up, whoop, grown men up with one arm and slams windows so that the wind stops. Again, we're really paying attention to the physicality of this character, Tom, and his money. And Nick is, again, more of a sort of boorish, very normal, a well-rounded man. So that's a bit of a contrast there. But I think the most interesting contrast comes in the character of Daisy, Tom's wife and Nick's cousin. Daisy's opening line is, "I'm paralyzed with happiness." She laughed again, as if she said something very witty, and held my hand for a moment, looking up into my face, promising that there was no one in the world she so much wanted to see. So Daisy is a very interesting person. She's paralyzed with happiness upon seeing someone that she's not very close with, and she's looking up wanting to know more. So she has a sort of way with words that draws characters in, and this sort of longing desire to see someone, even though there really may not be too much connection. And what would your response be to someone who's overly and emphatically appears to be joyed to see you at all times, and who speaks in a way that makes you want to engage with her, and it almost makes it appear, even if fake, that she wants to engage with you? What sort of a woman or a romantic partner might that person be? And is that their true self that they're portraying there? So she's a very mesmeric woman to all these men. Quote, "I've heard it said that Daisy's murmur was only to make people lean toward her." Now that's also interesting. So what kind of person is Daisy? It seems like she's someone that wants others to lean toward her or to pay her attention. So is this character's initial response an appearance of her true self or merely a persona, I wonder? Her low, thrilling voice. It was the kind of voice that the ear follows up and down, as if each speech is an arrangement of notes that will never be played again. Her face was sad and lovely, with bright things in it, bright eyes and a bright, passionate mouth, but there was an excitement in her voice that men who had cared for her found difficult to forget, a singing compulsion, a whispered, "Listen," a promise that she had done gay, exciting things just a while since, and that there were gay, exciting things to hovering in the next hour. So she's someone that men find very enchanting and exciting, but there's also sort of sadness with her. But that sadness isn't necessarily seen because she has this way with words that paints everything she does as some sort of new and exciting adventure. And she looks as well as this blonde-haired and blue-eyed beauty, someone who would be pampered and kept to at all times with a variety of said exciting adventures. So there's sort of that interesting shape there of a person where there's a maximum degree of life and interest in adventure, but it's also sort of hiding a secret sadness beneath it that may not be as spoken about. Her next comment, "Do they miss me?" she cried ecstatically. "The whole world is then Nick says, "The whole world is desolate. All the cars have the left rear wheel painted black as a mourning wreath, and there's a persistent wail all night along the North Shore. How gorgeous." So she's asking about her family and whether they miss her, and Nick says a hilarious joke, as he's apt to do in a very melancholic way, and she's excited about that. So the relationship between Nick and Daisy, I don't really think it's that close personally, but she's very interested in what people think of her. Do they miss me? Again, her second line in the total book, I believe. So she's really interested in the perceptions of other people toward her. Very interested in attention. Or is she? "I love to see you at my table, Nick. You remind me of a rose, an absolute rose, doesn't he?" She turned to Miss Baker for confirmation. "An absolute rose." This was untrue. I'm not even faintly like a rose. She was only extemporizing, but a stirring warmth flowed from her, as if her heart was trying to come out to you, concealed in one of those breathless, thrilling words. So here, she's trying to pay Nick a compliment. "Oh, he's a beautiful flower, darling." But Nick is like, "That is stupid. I am nothing like a frilly little flower petal. That is ridiculous." And she knows this. Why is she giving me this compliment? So again, what is her relationship to attention? That's kind of a question I'm always going to be debating with myself. What does Daisy really want from other people? It seems that she's really looking for approval constantly from all people in all avenues of life, much like Tom. So maybe that's why they're married. Maybe that's why they're compatible. But I'm not really sure. It seems all sort of fake to me, and I think Nick is picking up on that here. "I've had a very bad time, Nick, and I'm pretty cynical about everything." So Daisy's saying that, she lives this wealthy life of fun and adventure and excitement and pampering. She's genuinely sad and overtly cynical about life in itself. And again, she's got this sort of darkness about her, this sort of glooming overall sadness that perhaps she does a good job of hiding, but for how long might she be able to hide that? And Nick, at this time when they're talking, keeps trying to ask her about her child. Her child, I forget I don't even know if she has a name. It's just, I think, referred to as the baby. And now we're going to talk about that baby. And I want you to question now, for a brief moment in time, what kind of baby do you think a girl like Daisy, someone who is this enchanting, excited person harboring a certain sadness, but who everyone seems to be mesmerized by, the it girl, and this giant brute of a man, the 1% of the 1% in physical power and monetary familial wealth, what kind of child would they have? What kind of relationship might they have together? And I think both of those are actually the same question. I think the child, their baby, is a representation of their total relationship. Let's see. So Daisy starts out, "You ought to see the baby." "I'd like to." "She's asleep. She's 3 years old. Haven't you ever seen her?" "Never." "Well, you ought to see her. She's—" Tom Buchanan, who had been hovering restlessly about the room, stopped and rested his hand on my shoulder. "What are you doing, Nick?" So, that's interesting, right? Let's say the baby is a combination of Daisy and Tom, and it's sort of the representation of their relationship. That's the symbol I'm basing this off of. And Daisy's like, "Oh, you should look at our relationship." And everyone's like, "Yeah, sure, that'd be great." And then Tom says, "No, no, 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 no. We're not looking at that baby. We do not. Daisy and I, There's other things more important, like my raging biceps." Right? So that's interesting. Tom prevents the conversation from continuing, and Daisy doesn't really bring it up again. I saw the turbulent emotions possessed her, so I asked what I thought would be some sedative questions about her little girl. "We don't know each other that very well, Nick," she said suddenly. "Even if we are cousins, you didn't come to my wedding." So Nick's like, "Yeah, you should really tell me about this baby." And Daisy's like, "No, I'm going to avoid it. Just going to avoid this discussion about this child, avoid any connection that Tom and I might have, any talk about that. Nah, I'm good, thanks." And then she has this really interesting dialogue that goes like this. "Well, she was less than an hour old, and Tom was God knows where. I wake up from the ether and with an utterly abandoned feeling, and asked the nurse right away if it was a boy or a girl. She told me it was a girl, and so I turned my head away and wept. 'All right,' I said. 'I'm glad it's a girl, and I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world, a beautiful little fool.' You see, I think everything's terrible anyhow. Everyone thinks so, the most advanced people. And I know. I've been everywhere, and I've seen everything, and done everything." Her eyes flashed around her in a defiant way, rather like Tom's, and she laughed with thrilling scorn. "Sophisticated! God, I'm sophisticated." So, what a very complex portrayal of your child being born. So, the child is born. Tom is nowhere around whatsoever, complete absent from the hospital. And Daisy wakes up and is so ecstatic that she has a daughter, a girl, and she prays that she's just gorgeous and stupid, essentially, a beautiful little fool. And I suppose maybe that's the character of Daisy, where she's gorgeous, but she's stupid. Or rather, it's not that Daisy is particularly stupid, it's that she wishes she was dumber than she was, so that she didn't have to feel such abandonment and the agony of being alone all of the time. And she sort of has this misery about her, I would suppose, due to this psychological complex of simply being abandoned, perhaps by her husband, perhaps by her father, perhaps by other people in her life. But she's terribly alone. And this makes no sense to her because she's been everywhere and has done everything. She should be the most sophisticated person in the world. But in reality, she's just sad and alone. And she's hiding behind that through this facade of being a mesmerizing, enchanting woman. But in reality, it's just a mechanism to sort of cope with the reality of loneliness, which is a terrible sort of life to be living, something I can relate to from time to time myself. But that, I think, is those three characters of Tom, Daisy, and that baby. You've got Tom and Daisy. You have a very broken relationship, and that results in this character of the baby. I don't even think it has a name. It's not even fleshed out, and it's really not even referenced so often again in the book. So that's an interesting way to go about the beginning of those characters and showing what a sort of lack of intimacy in a relationship, what sort of life you would live if you perhaps get married to someone who can't be intimate, what kind of life you'd live if you yourself refuse to get intimate or unify with other people's consciousnesses. Daisy and Tom's relationship, I think, is fairly appropriate to write that out. Now, there's another character here, Jordan. She's not really I don't care about her. I'm going to skip over. I've only got 5 minutes before my camera ties out. Basically, she plays tennis and she's kind of like a cat. She's very lazy, but makes some important commentary here and there. She introduces us first to the concept of Gatsby and says that she knows him, which is unusual because no one knows him. And that's Jordan Baker. She's hot. She plays tennis. She's kind of like the very lethargic person, but still has some comments here and there. She's going to get together with Nick, and that's her character. Yay. Moving on. I wanted to note some other things about Tom and Daisy's relationship, particularly in the form of physical abuse. Quote, before I could answer, her eyes fastened with an odd expression of her little finger. Look, she complained. I heard it. You did it. You did it, Tom, she said accusingly. I know you didn't mean to, but you did do it. That's what I get for marrying a brute of a man. A great, big, halting physical specimen of a... I hate that word, hulking, objected Tom crossly. Even in kidding. Hulking, insisted Daisy. So, again, Tom, big gorilla man. Pound, 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 little Daisy, it seems like. He might be a hint of physical abuse in there, even if it's something small. And we can see Daisy's very scornful of this. She doesn't understand why he always has to hurt her so by either abandonment or physical abuse of some kind. So that seems to be an undertone in their relationship there. So, again, a lot of disunity here. A lack of connection is a core theme. Then I have this quote highlighted, so it must be important. It seemed to me that the thing for Daisy to do was rush out of the house, child in arms, but apparently there were no such intentions in her head. As for Tom, the fact that he, quote, had some woman in New York was really less surprising than that he had been depressed by a book. Something was making him nibble at the edge of stale ideas, as if his sturdy physical egoism no longer nourished his preemptory heart. So, Nick is saying that the relationship between Daisy and the relationship between Tom seems terrible. I mean, Tom is always away. Apparently, he has another woman who is calling him during dinner, which is something I didn't have time to reference. And Tom is always not even around for Daisy when she's having a child, so he doesn't even care about his own baby or his own wife, and he's clearly cheating on her and physically abusing her. Now, you would think Daisy, who seems to be a character who's creating a variety of personas because she feels abandoned and that she craves attention, she might want to leave Tom for someone that could provide her more attention. But she doesn't do that, Nick is already saying. So why would a woman, and this is a big question that I ask myself on a daily basis when I'm dating here in America, and a big question I want you to keep in your head throughout the entirety of this book, why would someone who desperately hates abandonment and who seems to require vast amounts of attention be with someone who makes them feel entirely alone? And why does she find that that is something good that she wants to continue? What does it mean? Then we have one thing that I want to quote at the end, which is a brief sentence about Gatsby. Nick goes home late at night, and he has this quote. A figure had emerged from the shadow of my neighbor's mansion and was standing with his hands in his pockets, regarding the silver pepper of the stars. Something in his leisurely movements and the secure position of his feet upon the lawn suggested that it was Mr. Gatsby himself, came out to determine what share was his of our local heavens. So Gatsby, again, is represented not as a character we're seeing, not as a character we're introduced to necessarily, but he's spoken about by all characters in this room, particularly Jordan Baker, and is inquisited about by Nick. And in the end, Gatsby comes, and we can see him in this large, overarching mansion. The mansion is completely dark except for one window, and that is where we see Mr. Gatsby. Mr. Gatsby himself is staring out in this green thing, bing, 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 shown on a dock from across the bay, which is on Daisy's house, and looking up at the stars. So we see this figure that's sort of alone and isolated in the world, but also has this deep hope about him because he constantly goes out and questions the world around him. In particular, he's questioning the look of the stars in the night sky, and perhaps is represented and likened with the statue of hope. And why is this man so alone, so hopeful? And how did he get here? And why does Nick love him so much and adore him so much and find him to be filled with life? What makes a person filled with life, and how and why does Daisy have the relationship that she does have? What does it mean to be intimate with somebody? How can someone go forward with doing that? And why would someone who desires intimacy so much be in a relationship where they feel completely alone? These are some of the questions and ideas that I will not have time to discuss now because my camera's about to time off in 10 seconds. But if you enjoyed some of these topics of conversation, please let me know in a comment below what you liked most about the chapter, what you think about the initial responses to the characters thus far, and what you think will happen in the future, and how relationships can change in accordance with the amount of intimacy that you feel in the relationship. Thanks so much for coming along with today's talk, and I will see you next time. Bye.